Today, we get to talk about my all-time favorite lift, the back squat. The back squat is arguably the most important lift, and as such, you don't have to look very far on the internet to find tons of opinions and pontificating about the best way to do the back squat. Here, I'm going to plant a flag on one long-running debate about the back squat, and that's the preference between either a high bar or a low bar back squat. I'm sure plenty of you are familiar with these terms already, but in case not, there are two sort of categories, I suppose you can say, of squatting that have different postures, different points of emphasis, and different training effects. There's the high bar squat, or an Olympic style squat, where the bar sits high in your traps and you stay relatively upright. There's also the low bar squat, which is more of a powerlifting squat that has more forward lean, likely a wider stance, and more emphasis on the posterior chain. Now, for my money, the high bar squat is the better choice in most circumstances, and that's the default style that I recommend to all of my clients and for anybody doing any Priority Strength program. The short version of my reasoning is that the high bar squat is a more complete squat with more knee flexion, more total range, and more carryover to other movements. So let's take a look. Here's a side view of a high bar back squat, or just a squat as I call it. If we take a snapshot of the bottom range here, we can see that at depth our torso is relatively upright and we've got a good deal of flexion at both the hip and the knee, fairly closed angles at both of those joints. That's a great thing. It's important that here, as with most exercises, we train with full range of motion to get the most benefit out of the movement. Now here's a side view of a low bar back squat. My feet are a little wider and you can see that there's a little more forward lean. This posture can help to emphasize the glutes and lumbar a little bit more, and because of this, the bar sits lower on your back so it stays over your center of mass, hence the name. But here's why I generally defer to the high bar version. If we pause at the bottom here and take a look at our joints, you can see that there's significantly less bend at the knee. The angle of our knees at the bottom is noticeably more obtuse than the bottom of a high bar squat. That means less range of motion around the knee, which I think is less than ideal from a training stimulus perspective. Now, defenders of the low bar squat might point to the fact that it allows you to use more weight, and that's generally true. If you want to be a competitive powerlifter and squat 800 pounds, then yes, the low bar style is absolutely the best way to go. The emphasis on the posterior chain, the more limited knee flexion allows you to squat more weight and have it still count. I say it like that because with most competitive standards for squatting, you have to hit parallel, or having your femur parallel to the ground, hip capsule at or below the knee. And undoubtedly, if your concern is squatting as much weight and having it count, then this is probably the way to go. But for training other than powerlifting, we don't care about what counts. You shouldn't care about whether a lift is good enough. You should care if it's as good as possible. When it comes to powerlifting, you don't get bonus points for going deeper than what's required. You hit the standard and that's enough. But from a training perspective, you absolutely benefit from going beyond this competitive standard. A deeper squat undoubtedly has a more profound training effect than one that stops at a conveniently observable line. That's why I prefer the more upright Olympic style of squatting. It allows for greater depth, maximum range at the hip and the knee. Your muscles have to work through a greater range of motion, and that provides a more useful training effect. Whether your goal is gaining muscle, burning fat, sport performance, strength, really anything other than maximizing the weight on the bar, the high bar squat is superior as a default movement pattern because of the training effect that it yields. Now, I don't mean to say that squatting with a wider stance and more of a powerlifting type style is worthless. Far from it. I fold it into my program regularly, and you'll likely see it at some point. It's a useful change of style that can help to round out a long-term program. But as soon as you start chasing pounds on the bar over the effect that it's having on your body, you're on the wrong track. My friend Stefan Cazot, one of the best strength coaches in the world, has said, "My goal as a trainer is to use the squat to build a better athlete, not to use the athlete to build a better squat." Do you follow that logic? What it means is that I don't care about manipulating you and your mechanics to get as many pounds on the bar as possible. What I care about is manipulating your training variables to get as much benefit for you as possible. So there you have it. That's why I prefer a more upright, full depth, high bar style of squatting. I hope this makes sense, and may it serve you well in your program.